Costa, thank you. Yes, it's great to see so many of you joining us from all over the world. It's amazing what this technology can do for us these days. So beginning about the role of the governing body, let's just think about who we are at the moment. There are so many different kinds of schools. I just dotted down a few ideas earlier on. Within the international group of schools, we could be having charity schools, we can have for-profit schools, not-for-profit schools, owner schools, schools that are run by trustees, schools that are run by boards, so many different kinds of schools, some with governing bodies, some without, some thinking about it, some have got them established, some have got new ones. But the one thing that all of these schools have got in common is that we all want the best outcomes for our pupils. And whether you have a governing body or you're thinking about it or you haven't or you don't want a governing body, you do as a school need to be fulfilling the role of the governing body. And that's why we feel that this webinar is going to be useful for everybody, whatever your situation, because the role of the governing body, whether you have a governing body or not, does need to be fulfilled. So just for today, rather than going through all the governing body, boards, trustees, and all those other different names that we can have, I'm just going to use the phrase the governing body to encompass all of those different groups and ideas. Otherwise, I will be going through long names and that will take us a long time. So the role of the governing body. So I'm going to go through 6 aspects of the governor's role today, just to give you a taster and to just alert you to some of the things that are required from governors, looking at the role of the governing body, how you would create an effective governing body, ways of working with the head teacher, perhaps what inspectors will be looking for in the governing body when they come to look at your school, and some of the reasons we know as to why governing bodies are successful and why some of them are not. As a governing body, you do need to cover 3 core functions. They are fairly simple and straightforward, but they are overarching and they override everything that you do in your school. So the first one is that the governing body, along with the executive leaders, do need to make sure that they have a clear idea of the strategic direction that they want their school to take. What kind of school is it? What are its aims? What's its ethos? And have you got that really well broadcast to everybody who is part of your school? Does everybody know what that strategy is? The second one is holding executive leaders to account for the performance of the school. Now, looking at the new strategies that are coming out in the UK, and although we are focusing at VIMA on international schools, a lot of what happens in the UK comes into the international school programme very soon afterwards. So it is important to keep an eye on what's going on. And what seems to be happening since we've come back in September is that the inspection reports that I've read are focusing in on whether governing bodies have actually held the head teacher to account. So we'll go into this in a bit more detail later on. And the third and final core purpose of a governing body is to oversee the financial performance of the school. Now, that's not just keeping the accounts. It's not bookkeeping. That's not what it's all about. Bookkeeping, yes, is part of it. Auditing books and so on are part of it. But it's more about the way that you manage your spending. Are you making sure that you're getting the best value for money? Do you have some kind of system or program for the way that you spend your money? Again, when we do our full training, our 2-day training, we go into this in a lot more detail, talking about what percentage of your budget should be spent on staffing, what percentage maybe should be on resources within your staffing, what percentage should be spent on senior leadership, and so on and so forth. But it is important that we understand that the financial performance of the school is not just simply, making the sums add up. So moving on to how you might have an effective governing team. Now, you don't have to all be superheroes, and even the governing body as a whole doesn't have to be a superhero. Just normal humans, normal people can make outstanding governors. So you don't have to necessarily have a huge knowledge of education. A bit of common sense actually goes an awfully long way. So what would we be looking for in a governing body or in a governor? Let's have a look. Now, 10 years ago in 2009, your school may have been set up, you may have had a governing body in 2009, but in 2009 or even 20 years ago, schools were very different places. Things have changed, things have moved on. And because of that, the one size fits all, the idea that we can still behave and work in the same way that we were working 10 or 20 years ago isn't going to fit your school today. So the one size fits all, as you can see down at the bottom there, if any of you have been shopping and tried a one size fits all thing on, it rarely fits anybody. As you can see, this one size fits all isn't suiting anybody there. Nobody is going to fit into that model. And it's very much the same with our governing bodies. Governing bodies have to change, they need to develop, they need to be fit for the purpose of today, not the purpose of yesterday or 20 years ago. Let's have a look at the kinds of skills that today's governing bodies might be needing in order to be effective. So here we've got 5, 6, 7, 8 sets of skills. I've put them together in little groups. They're not necessarily, they could be sorted in different ways, but these I've put together for you today. So a set of skills around people skills. So that would be things like counselling, listening, supporting, communicating. Is that something that you would be able to do? Then below that, we've got leadership. Are you a leader? Do you feel that naturally you step into that role? Are you good at organising? Can you steam ahead, and get things done? Are you a good planner? And are you able to think globally and keep the long-term vision in your mind as you forge ahead? Below that, we've got the data king, somebody who is really good at pulling data apart and understands it. So when the head teacher is talking to you about data, you have 1 or 2 people on your governing body who can analyse that themselves and are not necessarily totally dependent on what the head teacher is telling you. Up to the top again, looking at sales and marketing in the private school and independent school sector. This can be very important. You may be in an area where there are a lot of competing schools, and therefore having somebody who knows the business of sales and marketing and promotion could be invaluable. It could be that you need somebody with specific skills. So, for example, if you were just launching a school, you might need someone who's good at launching something, but they don't necessarily need to stay with you forever. And also someone who can organise the celebration of success to ensure that everybody is included and, and everybody who should be there is there. Below that, we have the researchers and the gatherers of information. Now, yes, your head will do a lot of that, but it is also important that on your governing body, you also have somebody else who can research and gather information, who is happy to go and find out about new ideas and new trends and innovations and do a bit more work, some of the spade work, to ensure, again, that the governing body is or can work independently when it comes to gathering information. At the top on the right-hand side, we've got the financial managers, the creative financial thinking. That's important, that you have somebody on your financial board who is creative with their thinking around finances, that they also are very aware of the local situation, because different countries have different rules and regulations about finances. So business management and banking and tax and all of those kinds of things, you need somebody who understands that. You may be employing an auditor to deal with some of it, the bank will do some of it, but somebody needs to understand what's going on. Creative people, creative thinkers, out of the box thinkers, all this blue sky and all this, these ideas. Those are the people that come up with the innovative ideas. They're the ones that sometimes plant the seeds that grow into amazing oak trees, and nobody else had thought of planting an acorn in this particular way. So creative thinkers, you need those kinds of people. And finally, down in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got the detail finishers. Now, I would personally always want to have a detail finisher around me because I'm a visionary person. I see big pictures. I'm not so great on the detail finishing. So you always need somebody on your team who will go along and sweep up that last stuff, the person who will make sure that those I's are dotted and those T's are all crossed. So looking at those 8 ideas there, now I can't see you, you can all see me, but I can't see you at all, so I'm talking to a blank screen here. What I would like you to do now is either with somebody that you're sitting with, if you're sitting with members of your governing body or a colleague at school, or if you're on your own, you can do it just as well. Have a look at those ideas and see where you think you would fit in. Do you fit into any of those bubbles there? And if you were to join a governing body, or if you're on a governing body, where do you think you would be best placed in order to give the best of yourself to a project? I'll just give you a few seconds just to look. It won't take too long. Okay, so in amongst those things, you've probably placed yourself in 1 or 2 of those bubbles. Let's now look back and think back to those 3 core purposes of governance, which were, if you remember, the strategic decision-making, strategic direction of the school, holding executive leaders to account, and the finances. With those skills that you've just identified for yourself, with all this in mind, could you place yourself in one of these categories? And at the same time, there's the blue category down on the bottom left, which says that I have other skills that may be useful from time to time. Now, one of the new thinking ideas in school governance recently is the idea that the governing body can be fluid. You can bring people in and out of your governing body. They don't need to stay. So if you have a particular project going on, then you might want to bring somebody in who can support you in helping you to understand the detail of what's going on this particular project. And once that project is completed, that person would leave again and maybe come back again in a few years' time. So something that springs to mind would be if you were having a building project going on in your school, if you were building a new wing or a new department or a whole new school, for example, and you were going to have the same governing body on 2 schools, then it would be useful to have somebody join you for that period to support you, to make sure that everybody understands what's going on, to be able to support the head. Perhaps there would be health and safety, serious health and safety issues if you've got building going on, so you might want to bring somebody in to support you with that. So other skills that you may have that could be useful from time to time, you might also want to put yourself in there. So again, have a look and see which of those 3 or 4 sections you think you would be best placed to work within. Okay, I can hear my clock ticking away there in the background. I'm going to move on because there are some more important things coming up. So I'm asking now, with all those things in mind, how ready are you to take on these roles? And as a governing body, how ready are you? You may be ready as individuals, but is the governing body actually complete? Or are there any gaps in the skills that you need that do need to be filled? It's important to remember that as a governing body or as a governor, it is not, it's a really important responsibility. It's not a status. Being a governor is not a status. It is a responsibility, and you are responsible for the successes or the failures of the future of all those children. And there may only be 9 or 10 of you on the governing body, but there could be hundreds of children depending on you. So remember and think of it like this. It's not a status, it's a responsibility. Okay. So now working with the head teacher. I often hear the word challenge when we're talking about the head teacher, and that comes up again in a couple of slides in the future. And I think sometimes people misunderstand the terminology challenge. So this is why I've used this. I like this picture here because it kind of says it all, really. If you're, hammering a nail in, hit the nail on the head and not the head on the head. So holding the head teacher to account often is referred to as challenging. And this is a statement that starts one of our whole sections in our 2-day training, which is how to challenge the head and get the best from that. Because inappropriate or clumsy challenge of the head teacher undermines their ability to lead the school. They cannot lead the school if they are being inappropriately challenged by the governing body. And if that happens, it can have a catastrophic impact on the school overall. If we've got the recruitment right, then you shouldn't be in this situation. So it's really important to go back a step when you recruit your head or your senior leaders within your school, that you are completely open and transparent about the type of school that you are running, so that there are no shocks or surprises for anybody, and to try and tease out as much as you can from your candidates what they are expecting. In some schools, governing bodies have very, very little impact on what goes on. They don't have a lot to do with the running of the school, and the head is almost autonomous. And then if they come to a school where they have a very active governing body, then it's working in a completely different way. So they may be keen to have that, they may welcome that, I'm sure they would, but it could still be a very big difference for them, a very big change in the way that they're used to working. So let's have a different look at what challenge might mean. The purpose of challenging the head, the purpose of holding the head to account, is really for you to prove or to justify something in order to gain a better understanding for yourselves as governors, and also to test your own understanding of something that's going on in the school. So working as a team, working in partnership with the head and the other executive leaders, you just want to know what's going on so that you can really understand it, because you can't have a very much impact on what's going on in the school if you don't know what's happening, if you don't understand the system, if you don't understand why this is happening or why that has happened. You can't support the head in doing something about it. Or indeed, if it's something good and you don't understand why it's good, how can you support the head in spreading that good practice across your school? However, there is a caution there, isn't there? Because governing bodies should not involve themselves in the day-to-day running of the school. That you have devolved to your executive leaders. There would be no point in going through all of that recruitment, paying thousands of pounds to advertise your head teacher's post, spending hours and hours interviewing people, flying people across the world in order to do that, if the governors are going to run the school. However, as governors, you should be knowledgeable about what is going on, and you will have had, as governors, the opportunity to be involved in the strategic decision making around what's happening in your school. So, what kinds of questions? So if you're challenging your head or holding the head to account, you want to know what's going on in the school, but you want to work in partnership with the head teacher. You don't want to be, hammering the head instead of the nail, for example. What kind of questions might you feel comfortable asking? What would be comfortable for the head teacher? So I've got a few examples here, and these are all linked to curriculum standards. And I've taken these from the National Governors Association, and these are the kinds of questions that they feel that governors should be asking. So, how do we benchmark our school might be something useful. How do we compare our school with other schools? Who do we compare ourselves with? And how are we doing in comparison? Those are simple, straightforward questions that give you a global picture of how your school is doing generally. You might want to know whether we have information about the progress we're making in subjects, and are we in line with expectations? And you might just say, can you explain it to me? Because if you're not sure about the data and the information, the head should be able to explain that to you. You might want to know what our strategies are for improving weak areas of performance. You might want to ask the head if we could set a timetable for governors so that we all have a clear understanding and we can meet and go through these areas of weakness. And you might also want to know who's going to give you that information, because it doesn't always have to be the head teacher. You might, for example, get better information about the geography department from the geography teacher, or about Key Stage 1 from your Key Stage 1 teachers. So it may not necessarily be the head who's got the most detailed information. The head may have the overview, but if you want more information, somebody else might do a better job for you. You might want to know why progress is better in some departments or some subjects than others. And do we know why this is? And can we explore it further? You might also want to know what the plans are to raise performance if they're low. What is the school doing to improve the situation? Governors should have an overview of these sorts of things going on in the school. They should understand and know, for example, if maths is well below average in our school, but science is well above, and what we're doing in maths to improve things. You might want to think about what's going on with yourselves as a governing body, and how will you demonstrate, how will the head teacher demonstrate to you that improvement is taking place? What data will they use? And this is where your data person might be really useful in supporting the governing body in pulling data to pieces and understanding what it all means, because we all know that data can say anything. So it's important that what we get from the data is actually the truth of the evidence that's in front of us. Another one, perhaps for the finance group, they may want to know if we've been spending a lot of money on interventions, for example, and interventions can be very costly, not just in terms of the resources, the paper or the computer programs that we might use, but also in time and money spent on extra staffing to run interventions. So you might want to know which ones were the best, which had the best results, and can we compare those with the cost, and which is the best value for money? And should we go with the best value for money, or is the most successful strategy actually worth spending the extra money on? And that's something that a governing body would be involved in, making those kind of decisions. We're coming to the end of some of these questions now. Do you know how much progress the children in our special needs department are making? And how are they doing compared to everybody else in the school? How are they doing compared to similar children in other schools? And finally, on the list that I've got here, can we learn from other schools? So your researcher on the governing body might have time to just do a little bit of digging around in similar schools, on their websites, finding out what they can that's in the public domain. I'm not suggesting you go in and sneak around in other schools, but schools do publish their results. They do publish the numbers of children taking exams and so on. So which other schools are doing well? And can we find out anything about how they're doing that, what they're doing? If you're working within a company of schools, and many of you in the international sector are working within companies of schools, then you would be able to access information about the other schools in your group, and you would perhaps be able to talk with the head teachers of those other schools or other executive officers within the schools and find out what they were doing and how they got that success, and whether some of those things might be appropriate for you in your school. Now, all of these questions, we'll take breath. I think we'll just take a breath there, because that was an awful lot to take in. So all of those questions are linked to the curriculum. And the curriculum is just one small part of what we do. The curriculum now in the new strategy encompasses everything that children learn at school. It is no longer seen as just being the subjects that are taught. The curriculum used to be the English, the maths, the science, geography, history, RE, PE, music, art, and the others. But now it's everything. It includes life skills. It includes what goes on outside of the school, the general school timetable. So there is a lot to think about now when it comes to curriculum. And over time, you might want to gather information on other things that are beyond the curriculum. And there are still things beyond even that curriculum. So, for example, you might need to know information about behaviour within your school, finance, buildings and assets. You might need to know about staffing. So just for a couple of minutes, maybe if you're not sitting on your own out there, you could think about what other areas beyond, we've talked about curriculum, we've got behaviour, finance, buildings and assets and staffing. What other areas might the governing body need to be asking questions about? Okay, I think that list could probably go on forever, and we don't have forever. So I'm going to move on now to the next part of the programme here. So just to finish off about the governors and what they need to do and what they need to be. Governors need to be curious, and they need to continue to be curious until they feel confident that they know about their school, that they have the knowledge that they need to do the job that they have to do. So if you think, I don't really understand what goes on here, and I believe I should know, I should understand it. It's not that you're going to interfere or want to change things, but you do need to know why this is happening. You know, if the school has decided to reduce the length of lunch times from 1 hour to 45 minutes, you just need to know why that decision was made. You're not necessarily going to question it or change it, but you just need to know why. So that if you are asked, why does the school only have a 40-minute lunch break, you're able to answer that question confidently. Also, that not all information needs to come directly from the head, and neither should it. As I mentioned before, the inspection reports that I've read this term in the last 2 or 3 weeks, where the schools have been weak, they have been weak because the governing body have been over-dependent on information coming solely from the head teacher. There is a lot of information that's available to, that should be available to the governing body that you can access for yourselves and you can analyse for yourselves. You don't necessarily have to go to the head to get that information. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you go behind the head's back, but the head can make that information available to you. So if you want to know what the GCSE results were, those are available for you to look at online. Most schools have got that on their website, so you can see that for yourselves. So you shouldn't be totally dependent on the point of view of the head teacher. You should be able to research that for yourselves. And having a culture of questioning means that a question no longer becomes a threat, it just becomes a normal thing. So if you're asking the teacher on duty why, if maybe you're doing a school visit and you go out onto the playground to see the children and they're not playing on a piece of equipment and you're wondering why, you should be able to ask a question, why aren't the children playing on the field, or why aren't they on the climbing frame, or whatever it might be. It's not a threat, it's just a question. There will probably be a very good answer. It may be they're not on the field because the grass cutter is due, or they're not on the climbing frame because the risk assessment wasn't done this morning for whatever reason, and therefore we're not putting the children on the climbing frame. And lastly, and this is really important, in order to avoid defensive attitudes, all staff should be trained around the role of the governing body. If the staff understand, and that's the head teacher, the executive leaders, and all the staff understand that the governing body have a specific role to carry out, then they're not going to be surprised when they see them doing it. If they don't understand why governors are coming into the school or attending an INSET course, for example, then they will wonder if there is some undercurrent that they don't know about, and they may be more defensive. So including everybody in some training about the role of the governing body will avoid that from happening. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left now, just to have a quick, and this will be very quick, I'm afraid, but it's just to give you a quick overview of what inspectors might be looking for if they come to your school. Now, most of you will be, because again, you know, we focus mainly at VIMA with international schools, although we do some work with schools in the UK and independent schools in the UK, but mainly our focus is on international schools. So as international schools, you're unlikely to have an inspection dropped on you at 30 hours notice or less. You usually know what's going on. You've usually either invited an inspection of some kind, or you know that it's going, your status is going to be renewed in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, and therefore you will be re-inspected. So you don't have quite the same pressure as government schools would have. But when inspectors come into your schools, whether you've invited them, whether they're just coming on a cyclic visit, they will still be looking for the same three things. They are looking to see if the governing body is carrying out its three core functions. And those are the things that we looked at right at the very beginning. The vision, the strategy, and the direction of the school. Have the governors got that clear, and does everybody understand it? Are you holding your executive leaders to account? Are you asking them the why questions and the what if questions and have we thought of questions? Or are you totally dependent on what the head teacher has told you? And finally, is the school financially stable? And they would be looking at things like resourcing, you know, do the children have the resources that they need in order to learn? Are there enough staff in the school? And if the answer to those are no, then they might want to know what's going on with the finances and what percentage of the income for the school is actually spent on the school. So they want to see the school being financially stable. Now that will be very different for different schools. A new school just setting up is going to be in a very, very different financial situation to a well-established school that owns its own property and so on and so forth. So you need to be clear and understand that the finances are secure and the school is stable. Some of the things you might want to consider that an inspector might be asking or looking for, he would want to know, or she or they would want to know, how effective is the governing body in ensuring good quality education for its pupils? So the school might be running quite well, but that could be because there's an outstanding head teacher in place. And what would happen if that head teacher left? So are the governing body effective in their duties to ensure that there is quality education for the pupils? How efficient is the governing body? Now we're talking here not about the school, but the way the governing body runs itself. How efficient are they? Are they making sure that the core functions are met, all of them? Do they comply with the legal requirements of the country? Each country is different. So, for example, the qualifications required for a teacher in some countries may be very different to others. Are the skills and knowledge, and we touched on this earlier on, if you remember, with those green bubbles, are the skills and knowledge within the governing body, are they diverse? Does it cover everything that the governing body needs? Are individuals making contributions, or is it being left to just one or two people? Are they seeking, this is the governing body now, are you seeking the skills and knowledge to improve year on year, or are you still the same as you were 9 or 20 years ago, 10 or 20 years ago? If you had an audit, which you should be doing an audit, whether it's internal or external, have the outcomes of that audit been dealt with, or are they just filed away somewhere and forgotten? And do the governors understand the current issues of the school? Are they up to date with what the school is that they are governors of? And there'll be questions around that. The Governors Association, the National Governors Association, the NGA, conducted research fairly recently looking at common failings of governing bodies. And the common theme was that the common failings are repeated over and over and over again. We keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So just before we go, we don't want to end on a low, but let's just be realistic and make sure that we're not falling into these traps and making the same mistakes. So the mistakes that we're seeing commonly are that governing bodies are not fulfilling the 3 core functions. They're not fulfilling all of the 3 core functions. They have not given a clear direction to the school community. The teachers and the head are not clear about what the direction of the school is. Weak governing bodies are over-reliant on the head teacher. They are taking things at face value and not delving a bit more deeply and asking the questions why. And they're not using information that they can gather for themselves. They have limited awareness of how people are perceiving the school. So they don't know what the beliefs and the opinions are from parents, for example. They don't know whether the staff, what the state of the staff well-being is. They don't have a program to monitor what's going on in the school, and therefore it's very haphazard, and they're seeing the same little bits over and over again and not delving deeply enough. The governing body themselves are not well organised, so their constitution is not being fulfilled. They have a constitution, for example, that says they meet once a month or once a term or whatever it is, and they're not doing that. Duties are not delegated properly, and so, as we mentioned earlier, 1 or 2 people seem to be doing all of the work and the other people are not aware of what's going on. There are too many vacancies on the governing body, and governing body meetings are not well attended, and governing bodies are not aware of the performance of the school. So conversely, that looks a bit grim. Conversely, strong governing bodies are doing all of these things. They are fulfilling their core functions. They do know what's going on in their schools. They do have a monitoring program. Everybody is involved. Every member of the governing body is involved, and there aren't any vacancies that stay vacant for a long time. So that's what we need to be working towards. So finally, what to do? What to do about this if we want to take the next step forward, whether we are a highly successful governing body, whether we are a brand new governing body, just taking those first steps. These are good steps to take. Firstly, conduct a skills audit regularly, once a year at least. Look at the skills that you've got in your governing body. Have you got the skills you need to take you through the next 2 or 3 years? Or do you need to recruit somebody with new skills, or alternatively, train people that you've already got to acquire those skills that we need? Conduct an internal or ideally an external audit to evaluate the work of the governing body. What work are you doing? What are you successful at? Are you fulfilling those 3 core functions? Are you asking the right questions? Are you having an impact on what's going on in the school? And finally, when you organise your governors training, and all of you here today are involved in governor training, otherwise you wouldn't have put yourselves forward to join us for this webinar. So we know that we're preaching to the converted here, but organise your governor's training schedule so that you focus on the current needs of the school, and better still, the long-term needs, so that when things come to you, you're already prepared, you've already got the training, you already know what's going to happen. No surprises, no knee-jerk reaction, everything prepared for in advance. So when you're setting your long-term plans, set your training in place at the same time, and that will stand you in stead. You will be very prepared for the future. And that's me for today. I hope you found this useful. It's been a bit of a sprint through things. As I've said at the very beginning, when we do our 2-day training, we go into this in a lot more detail. We don't only tell you what needs to be done, we talk a lot more about how to do it. And we do some interactive work as well. So I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'm going to hand you back over now to Costa, who is out there somewhere.
Thank you very much, Judith. That was very informative, and lots of things for delegates to take away that participated in this evening's webinar and to think about. We've got some questions that have come in, and I think it's really important that we spend 5 minutes or so just answering some of those questions because people have obviously been thinking and reflecting on lots of things that you've said. So I'm going to go to the first question that's come in. How many people should be on the governing body? I know that's a difficult question to answer, but what would you say would be an appropriate number?
Well, recommendations say it should be enough people to get the job done, but not so many that you can't get anything done. Generally speaking, for an average size school, you would expect it to be somewhere between 8 or 9 up to about 13 or 14. Not so many that you can't make a decision. However, it's always worth remembering that you can bring people onto the governing body for short periods of time to perform a particular duty, and then they can leave again. They have a special status. It's not quite the same as being a full governor, but if you need extra people for something in particular, you can do that. So somewhere between 9 and 13 or 14.
Thank you. I think it's important. Well, I don't think we did mention at the beginning that you are a former head teacher who's worked both in the UK and internationally. So you've worked with a number of different governing boards. So a lot of the things that you're talking about is you're referring back to the latest research, but also your personal experience as well of working as a head teacher. So those of you that are listening out there, Judith is very much approaching this from within as well and on the ground. As she's done the role of the head teacher. And I think it's important when you say it's about working together, and that word challenge can sometimes be a negative thing, but it's about actually understanding and supporting the work that the head teacher does and the school does, which is important. Right, another question that's come in. How often should you recommend a governing body meeting?
Well, the governing body actually can, in their constitution, can decide for themselves how often they want to meet. Generally speaking, governing bodies meet at least once a term, with subcommittees perhaps meeting more often and then feeding back into the main meetings. Again, people are busy, and dropping ideas, suddenly saying, oh, we need to have a governor's meeting next week, isn't really going to work, because you're going to find out that people just can't attend, and so that you're not quorate, you can't make any decisions. So I think what I would say is it depends on what work you've got to get done, but if you forward plan so that you know you're going to have a busy time, you can timetable in extra meetings during that period, but you need to give people advance warning. So about once a term, possibly every half a term, but your subcommittee meetings can meet more often.
And obviously doing your homework from before, not just to have itemized agenda, where you're going through the things that you can actually have up on before, which is really important. I've had another question that's come in that's really important is, do we have to have parent governors?
Well, again, we're looking at the international private school sector mainly, and therefore you can choose whether you have parents or not. However, if you want to put yourselves forward for British International School status, a full inspection, to get that kind of status, the inspectors will be looking to see that the word or the needs of the parents are being met by the governing body. Absolutely. Now, they would expect to see a parent represented on the governing body. if you don't have that, you would need to be able to justify why you haven't, and also to explain how you are gathering in the information that you would get from a parent governor. The idea of parent governor, however, being a representative as such of the parents isn't quite right. That would be your parent reps. Your parent governor joins the governing body in the same way as anybody else joins the governing body, and their role is to support the head and guide, if necessary, guide the head in the development and success of the school. Their role is not to bring complaints and so on to the governing body or to put their own children's needs first. Complaints have a different route. There should be a complaints policy which does not go directly to the governors in the first instance, so that wouldn't be the right route for it to come. So if parents coming and joining the governing body are aware of that and they clearly understand, and they're bringing with them a skill that is needed on the governing body, so they might be counsellors, they might be data analysts or whatever they are, they come with exactly the same profile and the same responsibilities as any other kind of governor.
And then going through the training to understand what it's like to be supporting within a school and supporting the head teacher, which is a lot of what we can cover. We've got a couple of more questions that have come through, and I do want to just we are running slightly over time, but people are still asking lots of questions, so we're just going to take two more. If we haven't had an opportunity to answer all your questions, do email them across to us at cpd@bema.co.uk, and we will get back to you in the next couple of days. It's important to mention that the recording will also be on our website next week, and you can access governance resources from our teacher research corner, which is on our website. But we have one question that's come in who said, thank you very much, Judith. In terms of academic monitoring, do you think that governors should have a link with subject leaders and meet with them regularly to understand how well the school is doing in that particular subject? And that's come from Hakan.
This come from?
Hakan.
Okay. There are changes afoot as to whether governing bodies should have curriculum governors. There is some rethinking about that around the new strategies, and because new inspections, and as we said before, what is happening in the UK tends to come on through to the international sector, particularly if you're looking for British international school status. And they are now looking at overall how the school is being run more than the results of one particular subject. However, I think the governing body do need to be well informed. That can, though, come through the head teacher's report. If the school feels that they have a good relationship with the teachers and the head, then there would be no threat to a governor going into school and meeting with curriculum leaders and finding out what's going on. The head would also want to know what's going on there as well, probably to attend that meeting or to set it up for you. It is useful to know what's going on, but you need to know more about why it's happening than what is happening, if you understand what I mean. If things are not going well in the history department, you want to be thinking as a governing body, why are they not going well and what can we do to change that?
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Hakan, and thank you for sending that through. Just one more question before we end. How many executives should you have on a board?
When you're talking executives, do you mean the chairman, the vice chairman, those kind of people? On your board, in your constitution, you would set up who you will have. So you would have a chair and a vice chair and a chair of your finance committee. Beyond that, there isn't any guidance that says how you should set yourselves up. So you don't necessarily need to have to follow anything. You can do what is right for your school at the time. So if there is something going on within the school, a project or something happening or a particular initiative, and you want to set up an executive group to run that, then you can do that and you can disband them later. So I would say that you do need obviously to have your finance, your chair and your deputy. Beyond that, those roles can change.
Thank you very much, Judith. There's lots of messages coming in saying what a fantastic webinar and thanking you. I think we need to end it there because we have run out over time. So thank you all for taking part in our webinar this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, the webinar will be on our website in the next couple of days. So if you would like to go back and listen to this again or share this with other governors at your school, then you will have that opportunity to do so. Good night from me, and I think it's good night from you as well, Judith.
Yes,
Yeah.
good night.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good end of your week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.